Mindfulness Wales, and I'm hosting tonight's event, or co-hosting it with my other colleagues from Mindfulness Wales. And the running order is we're going to have a short settling practice in a moment, and then Vishvapani is going to make some announcements. Dan Siegel will arrive around 7 o'clock, and he'll be with us for 45 minutes. I'll give a short introduction to Dan, and then at 7:45 we will have a short comfort break whilst Karen allocates us into different rooms to discuss the important talk that we're having tonight, and that will go on till 8:15. And in our breakout groups, if we can think about what Dan's been saying and what relevance it has to Wales, and especially for us in Mindfulness Wales, how we can take forward Dan's ideas into public policy in health and education, criminal justice and the workplace here in Wales. At 8:15, we'll welcome you back from the groups, and any of those points that you've want to make during Dan's chat or after Dan's talk, if you can put them in the chat room, and also we'll discuss those for 10 or 15 minutes and the relevance, as I say, to us here in Wales. So, and then it will finish again with a recap of our future events, our future speaking program for Mindfulness Wales over the next 3 months. So I am going to turn you over to Vishvapani, who is going to do a short settling meditation for us, and also for announcements as well, Vish?
Yes.
Okay, over to you, Vish.
Lovely. Well, really warm welcome to everyone. I see quite a lot of old friends and quite a lot of people whose names I don't recognize, probably joining us for the first time. We're really excited about this evening and really pleased that so many people can join us tonight. So, as is traditional with mindfulness activities, we're going to start with just a few minutes to settle ourselves. I'm imagining that most of us have our own ways of doing this, so I'll do it in a fairly suggestive way. Maybe I should just say my name is Vishvapani and I'm based in Cardiff, and I'm a mindfulness teacher, among other things. So let's just settle ourselves in a posture that feels comfortable. Remembering the height of the body, letting the body grow up from our seat. Have a space now to settle. Maybe it's not so much about what we do as an opportunity to let go of what we have been doing. So we can just pause. And anchoring this moment with awareness of the breath. Awareness of the body. Becoming present. And that can be an intention as well, an intention to let the preoccupations of the day just recede a little bit. enter into this evening with the spaciousness of simply being present. And then starting to move out of this short settling period. Maybe moving a little. But again, bringing awareness into the body if we're rolling our shoulders, stretching our fingers. And I'm going to give you some announcements, and you're very welcome to stay in that more settled meditative state while I say what I've got to say. So if you're here joining us for the first time, again, really warm welcome. We're a small group of people who want to really develop mindfulness practice in Wales, because we think that's a key to changing Wales, changing society, and bringing in the qualities that we value that are associated with mindfulness. We really invite you to stay in touch with our activities. And so to do that, and to do any of the things I'm going to mention next, what I invite you to do is to just look at the chat. I've put the URL for our website, and that contains links and all the details to various things, which I'll just mention fairly quickly. Via the website, you can sign up for our mailing list, our MailChimp list, and we'll send out details of future activities and other things that we're doing. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and that sort of thing. That's the kind of thing we do, we network. So this is our September meeting, and we're holding these webinar sessions roughly one a month. And to let you know what's happening next, in October, we are really pleased to have a Welsh language session exploring mindfulness in Welsh, and Gwenan, who is here somewhere along the top of the gallery view, and just waved. Gwenan will be leading that. And so if you're a Welsh speaker, and if you are concerned with developing that dimension of how mindfulness is explored and expressed in Wales, then please come along. We're really keen to establish a network of people, of Welsh speakers involved in that. Gwen has already done a lot of work there and has something of a network. We want to really develop that. In November, we're going to be hearing from Rob Callan-Davis, who's a senior mental health person in the Nairn Bevan Health Board. And we're going to be hearing various people who are developing mindfulness in the NHS in Wales. And there are some real developments going on, some things that are really groundbreaking wherever you look in the world. So that's November. And then in December, we have Ruby Wax. Or at least we've almost clinched the deal, but we're very hopeful, just as long as we can afford her fees and all that sort of thing. No, I don't think she's charging. So that's what's happening. The last thing I'd like to mention, second to last thing I'd like to mention is that as you see along the top row, there's just a few of us, and we want to change Wales. We want to change the world, actually, starting with Wales. So we need help. We need more trustees. And again, if you follow the link on the website, you'll see more about that, about what we're looking for. And we really just like to encourage you to think about that. Or if you don't want to be a trustee, to think about volunteering in some way to help what we're doing. In Wales, we have a unique opportunity. I don't think there's anywhere in the world where we got quite the opportunity that we have in Wales at the moment. And lastly, you know what the last thing is going to be, don't you? So if you would like to make a donation, that would give us great joy and actually be of a practical effect, because we're not charging for this session, but of course we can use that money very well. So again, if you follow the link to the mindfulnesswales.org website, then you'll find a link to a PayPal donation. Please do consider that. Right, those are my announcements, and I'm going to hand back to Chris. And then hopefully, before too long, we're going to be joined by Dan Siegel.
Dan's joining us from the west coast of America, from California, from his Mindsight Institute, which he's established out there. And he's zooming in at 11 o'clock in the morning, California time, which hopefully is 7 o'clock Welsh time or UK time. So he'll be here any minute. Shall I do my welcome, do you think, Vish, or my welcome to Dan before he arrives, so to give him a full 45 minutes, or should we wait until he arrives?
Yeah, let's wait. Then we can actually greet him and welcome him. Yeah. But you could, tell us a few things about him if you like.
Yeah, I'm Chris Rowan. I was an MP in North Wales for nearly 18 years before I lost my seat. And in the time I was out, I was visiting other countries, and I first came across Dan in a conference in Toronto University in 2017, and he was an inspirational speaker. He had the audience, a huge audience in the Toronto University, enthralled by his ideas and his wisdom. And I was so impressed with him that when I got back into Parliament in 2017, in fact, it was 4 weeks after the conference, I got back into Parliament. I had a word with Jamie Bristow, and we invited him into the United Kingdom Parliament to talk to our mindfulness all-party parliamentary group, or cross-party parliamentary group, of which there are now 300 politicians, members of that group. He came down and he addressed those politicians, and again, he enthralled them. He spoke for 2 hours and held the politicians' attentions for 2 hours. Now, some people say that politicians' attention span is less than that of a goldfish, which is 8 seconds, but he had them for 2 hours, and they were there. And again, we were so impressed with what he did in the British Parliament. We actually took him across to the Irish Parliament. They wanted the benefit of his wisdom, of his insight. So Dan went over to the Irish Parliament, and Jamie and I accompanied him, and he spoke to Irish politicians, and he visited Sister Stanislaw Kennedy, Sister Stan, who was voted Ireland's most popular woman, who took mindfulness to people on the streets, to children, and he celebrated and sang happy birthday to Sister Stan at her institute in the centre of Dublin. He has such humanity, such connection, which we will all feel here tonight. And he's also had a direct impact on the wellness agenda in education here in Wales. He was contacted by educationalists who were helping to develop that agenda, and immediately agreed to meet with us and inspire us. And here he is now. He's just arrived. I can see him there. So such a
hello.
Hi, Dan. I'm just singing your praises. Maybe it's
good way to start with some music.
Yeah, nice music.
Can you hear me all right?
For all my love.
Let's see.
Yeah. So thank you, Dan, for
some reason I'm not hearing anyone.
Right.
Let's see. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Hello, hello, hello.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? We can hear you.
Hello, hello. Let's see.
Shall
Oh,
we
I
put
see.
that in the chat room? We can hear you, Dan.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, great.
Can you hear us, Dan?
Now I can, yes. I had to
Oh, that's great.
unplug one thing.
So,
Good.
croeso, welcome, as we say here in Wales.
Thank you.
I've already sung your praises to the people attending here tonight, and so I won't cut back on your time, Dan. I've told them what an inspirational, wonderful person you are, and the work that you've done on children and teenagers, trauma, your Mindsight Institute, kindness, the list of mindfulness gifts that you are helping to spread around the world knows no end. So thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for your generosity that you showed to Sister Stan over in Dublin.
Yes.
Singing happy birthday to her on her 80th. And the generosity that you have shown to us all here in Wales tonight. Again, your generosity giving us this valuable time. I know you're a busy man. So I'm going to turn the floor or the screen over to you, and please start.
Good. Thank you, Chris. And thank you all for being here. Let me just ask you, I would love to make this as interactive as possible. So maybe I'll speak just for maybe 10 or 15 minutes and then open it up for a dialogue amongst all of us. Chris, how does that sound to you?
That's, if it's what you want, Dan, that's what we'll have.
No, actually, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. But I want to do what you want. So
Yeah.
do you want me to speak the whole hour? I can do that too.
Well, have you got an hour, Dan?
Yeah, I can have whatever time you want. Yeah,
Well, that's brilliant. Well, how about you speak a little bit longer than that, and then we'll have a chat.
Okay, great. So, it's really an honor to be back here speaking with the people of Wales. And as you know, there was an opportunity I had to really dive deeply into the educational system that exists now in Wales and the thoughts of how to reorganize it. And then the pandemic hit. So I think the virus may have put a stop at least to our involvement, but I look forward to hearing how that insight of bringing change about can happen. So I think what I'll start with is the word pandemic, and name 5 pandemics, actually, that when we think about them, it gives us a slightly different orientation to, for example, what mindful Wales might be, or even what the word mindful has embedded in it. And so let's look at these pandemics. Of course, the first one is something we're very familiar with, the COVID-19 SARS virus that has spread around the world and shut down our communities, our way of carrying out connections with one another, the way we communicate with one another, commerce. I mean, it's really led to tremendous amounts, I don't have to say this to you, but suffering on the planet. And we want to take a moment really and honor the kind of pain that's been going around all around this world. And as we soak that in, of course, you can have what has been named empathy fatigue. You can start feeling like it's too much, to think that a whole globe could be shut down so quickly and so many people could die and get ill. And for some people have long haul COVID, this long standing set of side effects from the illness, even if they recover from the initial illness. So we can easily burn out now. And so one of the things that the viral pandemic has done is it's focused our human family's attention on mental health. And we realize that our mental health is directly related to our social health. And so one of the things we'll touch on in a few minutes is, what is the mind, in fact? What is a healthy mind? And what do relationships, our social connections, not just with other people, but even our relationship with nature, what do those relationships have to do with the mind and the word mindfulness? So the virus has really made us realize how fragile we are. That's one thing. The second thing, this first pandemic of the 5 has forced us to see is how interdependent the world is. So we should just name something that we can talk about later on, but there's linear thinking, where you can say, I'm going to run a government in Wales, the United States, or whatever, and I'm going to make a rule here. And a linear thinking is something like this. Okay, I made the rule, so everyone's going to pay attention to the rule, and that's just how it's going to work. I'm the government, I make the rule, I'm an educator, I create an educational system, I'm running a company, I'm in parliament, whatever it is, you can be a linear thinker. And many of us, in our education are taught how to be linear thinkers. A leads to B leads to C. It's very logical. It has the initial appearance that something is controllable, but it's one way of thinking, linear thinking, that's very different from what's called systems thinking. So one of the things that the pandemic of the SARS virus, the COVID-19 disease, has forced us to do is realize how we are actually a part of a system. And it's required, even though people may not like it, a kind of systems awareness, systems thinking, systems even sensing. And these are all terms various systems writers talk about that we'll get into. But this is, the kind of hidden lesson that the virus has made us realize, that we can't just be linear thinkers anymore. It's just not going to work. And yet, linear thinking can be very, how can I say this politely? It can be very sure of itself and roll its eyes when you start talking in systems terms. So when we use a word like interdependence, or a word like connected, or a word like diverse, or these are all words from system science, and systems comes from mathematics. There's a way in which 4 aspects of the way we live. There's diversity, lots of different stuff going on. There's connectedness, there's interdependence, and then there's adaptation and learning. So a system, a complex system, has these 4 features to it that we can learn to respect and how to use it well or not. And so let's just earmark that because the virus is having us really think about these things. So a second pandemic that I'm not sure how this is for you in Wales, but certainly here in the United States, it's been an incredibly powerful awakening for people with European ancestry to realize that people who come from lands like Africa, who were stolen from Africa and made into slaves in this country, people of darker skin, are really part of what Isabel Wilkerson calls a caste system in the United States. You may not have this in Wales, but here in the United States, if you have dark skin, you're more likely to be killed. You're more likely to be discriminated against. And with the murder of George Floyd and murders that go on, sadly, every week, sometimes more than one a week, of people of color, especially Black men, the pandemic of social injustice and racism have become very, very clear. And in some ways, this social injustice has forced us to realize that even if we say, well, my ancestors came over in the 1900s, early 1900s, which is true of mine, with white skin in the United States, I have to realize that I'm a part of a white dominant caste system called the United States of America. So that's a particular issue for us here, that when you look at social injustice and racism, it exists all around the planet, but it's especially in a severe form in the United States. So this pandemic has also, in many ways, the pandemic of social injustice required that people realize, even if you are in the dominant caste, we have a responsibility for one another. We are interdependent. And a dear friend that Chris and I have talked about, John O'Donohue, you know, he had this great phrase. He was an Irish Catholic priest and I think a friend, Chris, if I'm not mistaken, of Sister Stan, you know, and, you know, John used to say, you know, the duty of privilege is absolute integrity. And, you know, John and I would teach together a lot, and the word integrity has the same root as the word integration, which we'll get into soon. Integration is a word we can use for the idea that you can have things be different, like different races, for example, but you connect across differences. So integrity that John was asking us to have as people of privilege, you know, in many ways is related, I'm going to suggest to you, to a process we'll get into in a moment called integration, where you realize there are different ways of being, and how we allow differentiation, this diversity part of the system, and then the connection to honor interdependence and allow a system to be adaptive. This is the difference between when integration is present, there's a sense of harmony, and when integration is not present, you get a movement of a system towards rigidity or chaos. So in the first two pandemics, in many ways, we're going to see that they are impairments to integration that are leading to chaos and leading to rigidity, both of them. A third pandemic, which I think many of us are seeing across the globe, is the pandemic of misinformation and polarization. You know, whether you're talking about working in a parliament in the UK, or I've worked in parliaments in other parts of the world, you know, and you certainly see this in the United States. We are in a state of profound polarization that then gets massively amplified with the internet, where you have these small bubbles of viral misinformation that go around. And research has shown that if a statement going around the internet is false, that is, it's misinformation, it's much more likely to be taken in by people in that bubble. We just had a family gathering where one of our family members was completely into conspiracy theories, and she was untouchable about thinking 9/11 didn't really happen, and the virus is just some kind of democratic hoax for the pharmaceutical companies to make money on vaccines. And, you know, she was untouchable, this family member, who's a very, very bright woman, but she just, you couldn't reach her. So these misinformation polarization bubbles have just intensified. And in many ways, that's also from this impairment to integration. That is, you get excessive differentiation of sources of information, and misinformation spreads much, much more quickly with more stickiness than actual complex facts. So it's easier to believe, oh yeah, 9/11 didn't happen, than to realize we live in a very complicated world. You know, and it's worth just mentioning this acronym that comes from the military, VUCA, V-U-C-A. It's a very helpful term from the military that now journalists use. V stands for volatile. U is uncertain. So volatile means things change really, really fast. Uncertain means we really don't know. It's hard to know, you know, day to day, week to week, exactly what's going to unfold. The C of VUCA is complex, meaning there are so many different things, and this is where we talked about, that are diverse, connected, and interdependent, that it's really hard, because complex systems are what's called nonlinear, meaning a small input can lead to huge and very difficult to predict outcomes. So that's the C of VUCA, complex. And A is ambiguous, which means even if all of us here sat down and got all of the data and said, these are all the data points, we actually wouldn't know what they mean. There'd be ambiguity in knowing how to interpret them. So volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, when we name that, we can see that if you're in government or in education or a clinician or running a company, VUCA times make our work much more challenging to try to have the system work. Okay, so I say that because this misinformation and polarization is yet another pandemic. That's the third one. The fourth one that will show how all these can be related to the mind and stuff. But the fourth one is something, sadly, I don't know how it is for you, but here in California, we live it in the air. We are painfully not able to breathe. And so, our state is burning. We've had millions of trees that have been here for a long time that give life-giving oxygen, just burning up. We are in a horrible drought, and the dryness makes these trees kindle for fires that are uncontrollable. And so all that, but let's name this pandemic. The climate, whether you want to call it crisis, that some people call it, or the climate condition, or climate change. These words are important, which ones we use, and they evoke an emotional response. The climate situation, when you just read the UN report that came out just a couple of weeks ago, it is profoundly sobering. The things we would hear maybe 20 years ago, and you would kind of take a deep breath, you go, oh, that's just hysterical thinking, or that's not really going to happen. Those things are happening now. So there are many documentaries that, help us articulate that. But what it means is that this fourth pandemic of environmental destruction is creating what the, I believe he's an anthropology professor in Australia, Glenn Albrecht, calls earth emotions. Earth emotions like a feeling of grief that the earth we once knew, and for children, maybe they didn't know it, but the earth they feel they could have once known is no longer here. And, I don't have to go on and on about it, but just to, sadly say this fourth pandemic, of the incredible loss of biodiversity, of the loss of species, of the loss of environmental conditions that support many different life forms. It is, in the misinformation world said, oh, this is just what the planet goes through. But with thousands of scientists weighing in, these are human-caused problems. Now, the good news about that is that if they're human-caused, we still have hope that they can be human reversed. I mean, that's the good news about it. And the first pandemic, the viral pandemic, is a good example. You get a virus that kills individuals. And the research is clear that when the earth shut down human activity for the 12 big months of shutdown, the earth started regenerating. So you have to ask the question, as the youth in Europe are leading the way, you have to ask the question, if a virus can get us to stop, why doesn't the environmental pandemic get us to stop? It's a really good question. And I don't have an answer except to say that the human mind, that we'll get into in a moment, the human mind has a tendency to really not deal with long-term problems very well. It's oriented towards immediate linear thinking and immediate gratification. And on the worst of days, I feel kind of hopeless about, the human mind for our human family, the 7 billion of us, whether we can pull our act together, because the scientists, and there's an incredible book coming out next week called Regeneration by Paul Hawken that I recommend to you, on top of Paul Hawken's book that came out last year called drawdown. But there you'll see the positive things we are doing. So it's clear there are things we can do for this fourth pandemic. The question is, will we do them? And the forces against us have to do with the fifth pandemic I'll talk about in a moment, but they also have to do with just the way the human mind operates, So that's the fourth pandemic. Now, what is the fifth pandemic? The fifth pandemic is what I'd like to spend the bulk of time weaving this fifth pandemic together with its impact on the other four pandemics. It may be that it worsens the other four. This fifth pandemic I'm about to mention may actually be the cause of some of the others, but certainly it worsens it. And what I want you to consider, and this is just, an idea with serious consequences, if it's a correct idea, but it may not be. But if it is a correct idea, this fifth pandemic holds the possibility for positive change that could happen fast enough in the next 10 years to actually make a difference. So what's this fifth pandemic? This fifth pandemic is looking at how the human mind constructs, so builds, or in scientific terms, there's a word, construal, how it construes, which is just a strange English word. I don't know if you use that in Wales, but we hardly ever use that in regular English in America anyway. But anyway, for scientists, construal means how does the self get constructed, basically? How does it get put together? And from an anthropological point of view, what people study at the extremes are individualistic self-construal and collectivistic self-construal. So in the individualistic one would be myself is here in Dan, right? And Chris's self is in Chris, Gwyneth's self is in Gwyneth's body, and we're all separate selves. And that's pretty straightforward, and it's pretty obvious, isn't it? I mean, Chris's parents gave him the name Chris. Chris's self is in that body. So what's the big deal? Why would we even question this? So this idea of the individual being the center of experience that we're going to call self and elaborate on now, is it's so obvious people hardly ever question it. Yeah, of course. If you say, where am I would point to my body. I'm here. Or maybe I'd even point to my head and say, well, myself comes from my mind, and my mind is just brain activity. So that's where myself is. So from an academic point of view, this becomes a huge, huge question because, since the time of Hippocrates, in Greece, the grandfather of modern medicine, Hippocrates said, the mind and all our joys and sorrows comes only from, and I emphasize what he said, only from the brain in your head. And then the grandfather of modern psychology, William James, in 1895, in the Principles of Psychology, he just said, yeah, that's obvious that that's true. So let's just go on and just try to understand it. So if the mind only comes from the head, then you get to study the brain. And you can say things like, well, here's this network that creates your sense of self up here in this part of the brain, and this does that, whatever. And what you get then is the ability of parents raising children within a culture reinforced by what happens in school to basically tell, little Gwennon, she is in her body. She should spell the words right. And if she gets an A, that's great. And if she gets a D, that's not so great. And Gwennon will feel a certain way, or Liz will feel a certain way, or Chris or Dan, or any one of the selves we're talking about. So if you say, okay, well, that sort of is obvious. Why are we even saying this is what's the pandemic of a separate self? And what I want to suggest to you is that when you look at the science of self, three things come up repeatedly through different, scientific efforts to say, what is the self? One is something called subjective experience. It's just like the felt texture of things unfolding, right? So you can feel, okay, Dan said the word Chris. How does that feel for Chris? And how does that feel for Simon to be, thinking Chris's body is his self and Simon's body is in his self, and you have Becky in herself, and all these things you could say. So you have the subjective feeling of that. The second thing is you have perspective, that you take the point of view as if you're looking, through your glasses. So a point of view is what scientists consider the self business. And then the third facet that people talk about is agency. How are you enacting behaviors, right? So what is really amazing, if you look at the self-control studies, is you can modify subjective experience, perspective, and agency relatively quickly, like in a few moments within a research paradigm, and show that you can actually change the way the brain functions very quickly about how this person is considering themselves separate or connected. A colleague of mine, Dacher Keltner at UC Berkeley, he even showed that if you just have people, basically they're walking down a path at a college, it's actually where both my kids went to school, UC Berkeley, and you have them pause, and you say, "Can I ask you a few questions?" And if in asking those questions to that person is looking at a human constructed building, they act afterwards in certain ways very separate. They don't help other people. They're not very kind. And the way it works is you have someone fall down and spill out a bunch of pencils. They're not going to help them too much. And this is done randomly, but if you have that person looking at this incredible set of eucalyptus trees that are absolutely awesome, and you literally can show that people have an experience of awe, even though they're just answering these questions. If they have the experience of looking at trees, then they turn around, go on their way, and a person falls down, pencils spit out. They're going to help them with a ton of those pencils, because awe gives you this expanded sense of self. So you have awe, gratitude, and compassion are traditionally called self-transcendent emotions. But when I was teaching recently with Dacher, I said, that's really a problem to use self-transcendent, because it's reinforcing the illusion that self is separate and you want to transcend this separate self. Why don't we call them self-expanding? And he was very excited about that. So I say that because just a little thing like that, being in nature, setting up research paradigms. So here's what I want to say about the pandemic of what we're going to call the solo self. The solo self would be a self-construal that says who an individual is, their subjective experience, perspective, and agency is housed only in their body. Now, when you start teaching that to a kid, I'm an attachment researcher, when you show that parents teach that, kids listen. When you see how kids experience school, they listen. When you see the messages they're getting on social media, they listen. And so much of modern culture is telling us about the solo self, this isolated, individualistic view. And you may not know this, but the United States is the most individualistic country in the world. And we have some of the worst states of mental health anywhere on the planet. And I was once doing a research project in Namibia and the southern part of Africa. And we were there to see if the tribes people used language to articulate the mind. That was just part of the project. But around the campfire one night, I said to the translator if it would be respectful to ask the following question. He goes, "Sure, what's the question?" I said, there's a drought here, there's a famine, there's an epidemic of untreatable tuberculosis, and yet in your village, people look really, really happy. And the villager looks at me, hearing the translation, and he goes, "Yeah, my people are happy because we belong. We belong to each other in community, and we belong to nature." And then there's a pause, and I'm just going, "Oh my God," And then he asked the question I was afraid he was going to ask: "In America, do you belong, and are you happy?" And the studies are really clear. We have some of the lowest rates of belonging, this feeling like you are embraced in a larger whole than just your skin encased body. So belonging becomes central to how our identity unfolds and what we can do to address this solo self issue. And in many ways, I think, the way, at least in the United States, people have refused to take the vaccine is a part of the individualistic attitude of a solo self. I'm going to call it an illness pandemic here in the United States. So it makes the first pandemic worse. The second pandemic, of social injustice, is a profound way where you say, well, myself has this color skin, yourself has a different color skin. So, and the studies of the brain show, if I put you in the out group, I shut off my circuitry of compassion and I treat you like a piece of dirt. But if I assess you as in the in group, I will treat you with kindness and care. We've had, at least some researchers suggest, 50 million years of primate evolution of in-group, out-group evaluative distinctions made by our brains. And we treat people in the in-group with more kindness, people in the out-group with more hostility. So a solo self problem makes racism possible because we fall prey to this in-group, out-group distinction. The pandemic of the third pandemic of misinformation and polarization is also in many ways worsened by the idea that the self is separate. Even if you make the solo self plural, I say everyone who knows 9/11 never happened and that the COVID-19 hoax is just pharmaceuticals trying to get rich on the vaccine, and those are all my people, that's also incredible isolation of a plural solo self, and not believing, factual information or science. We saw that with leaders, unfortunately, in a number of countries, including the United States. So that's the pandemic of misinformation. The pandemic of environmental destruction, you could argue, is an example of how an excessive solo self separates human beings from the rest of nature. So if you look at indigenous teachings from cultures from around the world, often passed through the oral tradition, the idea of humans being separate is so foreign to the way it's taught about who people are, that people are stewards of the land, not owners of the land, that people are here as a part of nature, not separate from nature. But once you're separate from nature as a solo self, you can build a factory and you can have your eyes on your bank account. And as long as your bank account is growing, that's your linear way of thinking, that you're here on this life about 100 years. And if you can get as much money as possible and toys as possible, you'll win. So the short-sighted consumeristic view, sadly, can be understood to be the cause of environmental destruction. So the fifth pandemic then is something you could argue, if you wanted to really try to address the four pandemics, this fifth one is how you would do it. And what I'll just share with you now before we open up for questions in just a couple of minutes and discussion is, if we could just name this, so it wasn't some, contemplative thing, or it wasn't just, oh, let's go back to indigenous teaching, or it wasn't something like, oh, this is impossible, but really make it, in a sense, bottom up, like how does a parent raise a child? Something simple like that. How does a teacher in an early classroom, emphasize the subjective experience of the whole, as well as the subjective experience of the body? How could a teacher allow the perspective of the whole, W-H-O-L-E, be combined with the perspective of the body? So we're not saying get rid of the body as an important me, if you will, an I, the interior self is real. We're not saying get rid of that at all. But what we're saying, if it's going to be an integrated self, how do you allow that to be differentiated, the inner, and let the skin, including the skull that's a part of the whole body, how do we let this interior embodied part of our existence then also realize the self is relational, that the self is relational with other people, with people not like you. The self is relational with all of nature. The self is relational not just with what's happening now, but what happened in the past and what's going to happen in the future. So, as the saying is often made, how can we be really good ancestors? And without that kind of thinking, things look pretty dismal. So, I wake up every morning and I think, well, what's the point of doing anything? And the only thing for this body, that feels like it's something to do is to try to get the idea of integration as the base of well-being. So it's this between, what's called the edge of chaos and even the edge of rigidity. It's this sense of harmony. And that if we integrate identity, it would be as a me and it would be as a we. And then the fun way we do that is to say, well, me plus we, you don't get rid of them, is we, MWE. So we're collecting that funny word, how you would combine me and we into one word to say, I have an integrated identity. So a child in school, a child at home with parents, the way a company would comport itself, the way a government would comport itself would be to say, yeah, we want to honor the individuality and the interiority of subjective experience, perspective, and agency, but we are equally relational. And so we want to emphasize that. And the win-win situation of we is that it allows you to broaden belonging. It allows you to build on a scientific argument, which I make in a book called The Developing Mind, that to see the mind as only from the brain, while it's been said for 2,500 years, it is a part of a much larger story. And if you think it's the only story, if that's the way people in science comport themselves, oh, mind is just from the brain, then it's a lethal lie. And I say lethal because of these pandemics. Each of these pandemics really invites us to go deep. So you say, well, how does this relate to mindfulness? Well, in many ways, mindfulness includes 3 pillars, of focusing attention with more strength, opening awareness with a sense of receptivity, and then building kind intention. I was in a meeting with a bunch of researchers. They couldn't agree with what mindfulness meant, by the way. And so I put out these 3 pillars. I said, well, if you're building focused attention and building open awareness and building kind intention, wouldn't you call that mindfulness? And half of them said, absolutely not. Kindness is not a part of mindfulness. And the other half of the researchers said, it is fundamental to mindfulness. And they had a very mindful disagreement. So they actually couldn't come to a definition of mindfulness. So I said, okay, well, why don't we just call this 3-pillar mind training, whatever you call it, was with relation to the word mindfulness. And they all agreed. So that's a term that was accepted in this meeting. So if you say, well, what are we going to teach to parents? What are we going to teach to schools? What are we going to teach in governments? What are we going to teach in there? You can use the word mindfulness. That's great. I think it's a beautiful word, but you want to be, I think, very specific about what it is. And if you just put the 3 pillars into it, half the researchers will be fine with that. And that's fine. But, for attention, you're strengthening its focus. So instead of being scattered, you can sustain attention on your chosen object of attention. You can notice when the mind wanders. You can let go of what the distraction was and return your focus. So when we say strengthening the focus of attention, there's 4 parts to that. But just to keep it simple, you say strengthen attention, but it's actually 4 different things and 4 different networks in the brain that do those things. Open awareness. What open awareness does is it allows you to sit. We have something called the wheel of awareness practice that has all 3 pillars in it, but it's like sitting in the hub of the wheel where any object of attention would be on the rim. And in the hub, you're able to take in whatever's on the rim with the movement of a spoke of attention. So awareness and attention are not the same. And in doing this with many people, and I did this in a parliament before the pandemic, and one of the parliamentarians didn't want to share during the break. And there's a part where you bend the spoke around, you go right into the hub of that wheel as a metaphor. Well, this parliamentarian said, number one, he had never meditated before in his life. But when he bent that spoke around into the hub, he never felt, in his words, so connected to everyone and everything and so much love. And now he's crying. And so there was this silence between the two of us. And I said, so you didn't want to share that with your colleagues? He goes, oh, no. I said, okay, well, can you tell me why? He goes, and he points over the other side of the room to his parliamentarians. He goes, they would think I was weak if I said love. So there was this silence, and I just looked at him and I said, so can I ask you a question? He said, sure. And I said, when you're making federal law, when you're making national policy, are you leaving love out of the reasoning? And his eyes got really, really big. And he went over to talk to his colleagues, and I don't know what they said, but the hope with an experiential practice, in this case, it has the 3 pillars in it, this wheel of awareness practice, is when you get to that open awareness, and this is another use of an acronym, COAL. I used to use it in a different way, but in doing this with literally 50,000 people, the first 10,000, I recorded all the results when people would take the microphone. But what people experience in that hub is connection, that open awareness, and love, as if they were like 3 threads of a singular tapestry of life. So when we say that mindfulness allows you, if you talk about the 3 pillars, allows you to gain this feeling of love and this feeling of connection, the separate self dissolves away. It doesn't mean you don't have an interiority to you. You do. What it means is you also experientially feel the reality of interconnection and interdependence. And so you become, in a sense, open to the system as it is. So this is something that we don't usually talk about it with mindfulness, but you're building also kind intention. And so kindness, instead of seemingly being soft, it's the strongest state we have, the state of being filled with love and connection. And so imagine a world where we could encourage people to now live with this focused attention that's strong, to live with the capacity for open awareness and not fall prey to these misinformations that we have, to live with kind intention, and to realize all that stuff. I mean, just to summarize this, and then I'll stop, Chris, so we can open it up, to realize that if you had to have a reason for people to individually to do this, when you do 3-pillar practice, the research shows, number 1, your brain changes the anatomy to become more what's called integrated. Differentiated areas become linked. And I could give you the parts of the brain that do that, but the bottom line is an integrated brain is a resilient, healthy, happy mind. So that's awesome. That's like, in one sentence, the summary of what does mindfulness practice do to the brain. There are 5 physiological changes that have been documented. You reduce the stress hormone cortisol, you improve the way the immune function works, which is really useful during a pandemic. You enhance cardiovascular health factors, like lowering blood pressure if it's high and lowering cholesterol if it's high. You alter the epigenetic regulators, these non-DNA molecules that regulate gene expression, to reduce inflammation, which we now know inflammation, it can be the cause of serious life-threatening illness. So that's your mind with 3-pillar practice does this. So reduce inflammation, number 4. And number 5, you optimize an enzyme called telomerase, which repairs and maintains the important ends of the chromosomes called telomeres. So when I sent the manuscript for AWARE, which summarizes all this stuff, and we have a whole course on AWARE coming up, you can please come attend it. I sent the manuscript out to the people who discovered this telomerase stuff. And one of them, Melissa Eppel, who works with Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering this system, she said, "You've left something out." I said, "Oh my God, the book is already too long. I don't want to put more in." She goes, no, 1 sentence. I said, "What's the sentence I need to say?" She goes, "You need to say that 3-pillar practice slows the aging process." And I said, "That is audacious." And she goes, "That's what Elizabeth and I showed. So please honor us these are the world's expert on aging, and please say it. So I, with a lot of quoting them, I said, and it slows the aging process. So if you said there was a vitamin that did these 6 things, it's going to integrate your brain, it's going to reduce stress, it's going to improve the immune function, improve cardiovascular health, it's going to reduce inflammation, and it's going to, optimize how your telomerase is so you can slow the aging process, people would take that vitamin in a heartbeat. And it's mindfulness practice. It's basically, health for your mind, and the mind is both embodied, and therefore you can see what I'm doing with my mind, energy and information flow. Basically, what I'm doing with my mind is actually changing the molecules of health of my body, the networks of interconnection in my brain, and improving the relational integration I have with other people and even with nature. So, for me, the idea of speaking with you in Mindfulness Wales was such an honor, because the future of the world depends on whatever you want to call this thing: mindfulness, 3-pillar practice, open awareness, dissolving the illusion of the separate self. All those things are just the same thing. We have to figure out how to word it and ground it in solid science and practical applications, but we're really all talking about the same thing. And we have to work together as a we to make this world the kind and compassionate place that I think deep inside we all feel and know is possible. So thank you for your attention. And I look forward to opening up for discussion.
Thank you very much for that, Dan. Really insightful. And you've touched on lots of issues that we're Mindfulness Wales are dealing with at the moment, or Wales as a country is dealing with. Brexit and political polarization. We're still dealing with the aftermaths there. It split families, it split communities. You mentioned the nature, the importance of nature. Karen, who is on here tonight on Mindfulness Wales, is drawing up a map of mindfulness activities in nature in Wales. So that's an important agenda for us. Mindfulness in education in Wales, you're already advising on us, and we're making great play and great progress on that. We were able to address the Prime Minister of Wales, the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, 2 years back, and he issued us a challenge. Don't rely on government to tell people they've got to do this. Go to the community, let mindfulness bubble up from below. So again, how do we introduce mindfulness into the community? So this is, and loneliness as well. You touched upon loneliness. The Conservative Prime Minister of Britain described loneliness as the second biggest killer in the country, and appointed a minister for loneliness. So you've touched on all of these big issues. I asked the questioners here tonight, address your questions to Dan, but if you can, do it through a Welsh prism, so that when at the end of this we can take away those threads and develop them and actually turn the thoughts into actions and possibly policy. So if there are questions there, I'm not sure how we're going to do this. It is a chat. We've got the chat room here. Probably the chat room would be the best. Are there any questions bubbling up out there for Dan to address? And I think we've got 11 minutes. Are there any questions there?
Chris, I can see that Kamala Gita has a question.
Right, sorry, I need to put my, Kamala Gita, over to you.
Thank you for that. It was really moving, and I'm still feeling the effect of the statement, we need to be better ancestors. So I think that actually speaks to the spirit of Wales, because our national anthem is Land of My Fathers. It starts Land of My Fathers. So there's a huge, there is a huge sense of belonging in Wales for some people, to do with the landscape and the land. And yet, I've seen this sort of erosion in community, really. Some of the stuff that Chris is talking about, particularly the community I'm from, which is kind of poor ex-industrial valleys. And I'm just thinking about how can we help people belong more? Because people, I'm sure, like in parts of rural Pennsylvania or whatever, people feel like nobody's looking out for them anymore. So that's my question.
Yeah, thank you, Kamala Gita. I appreciate that. I think it's like a central question. I know our former Surgeon General of the United States wrote a whole book, I think it's called Alone or Loneliness or something like that, which highlights exactly what you're saying. And, you know, I think if people started realizing that who we are is based on relationality, you know, that is your connections with other people and with nature, we would just start living in a different way. You wouldn't, you know, you wouldn't allow a person to be isolated. It just would be unnatural, you know, in that sense. So I know this may seem intellectual, but I think if kids in schools and the way we speak about things, if you just say, look, who we are, the mind, is as much embodied as it is relational. That is, we are our connections. You would start seeing, I think, a very different way of people connecting and feeling responsible for one another. Unfortunately, there's this sad reinforcing loop where once people think of the self as separate, or the mind just coming from the brain, everything follows from that, and it goes down, 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 down. So people just make, quote, other people, you know, the out group, and it just becomes overwhelming. So, you know, small communities that, you know, it could, where someone can feel known would be the way to do that. Now, every culture is going to be different. I know here in Los Angeles, I can go an entire day and not recognize anyone. I've never seen anyone before. I can go a whole week where I don't recognize a single person. And so if I didn't have a family, I would feel completely alone. You know, people just go on their way. So somehow changing culture to embrace this difference. It's like what that person said in Namibia, or I was recently in a small town in Italy. And, you know, everything was about community. And there were structures created to support that, cafes, ways of talking, just people on the street, completely different than what goes on, for example, in this individualistic country called the United States. So it's not a simple thing to say, but, you know, having a place where people can connect. I know I have a relative who's runs Alcoholics Anonymous groups now on Zoom. He has like 130 people on here, you know, and they do these 2-hour sessions. And there's this incredible feeling of belonging with their common history of being, you know, alcoholic. And it's a beautiful thing to see. Now, without that, I think people would just be suicidal. But with that daily meeting, there's a feeling of connection and community. So I think you could start building it into naming it so we can make it happen, you know?
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Dan. Thanks for that, Kamala Gita. I think we've got Ewan Brock, who is the next questioner. Karen, can you let him in?
Ewan, would you like to unmute yourself, and then I can...
Oh, can you hear me?
You are.
Hi, Dan.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for that. That was fantastic.
Oh, you're welcome.
When you were coming up to that 5th pandemic, I was surprised with what you said. What was I was expecting, and I wonder if it's a 6th pandemic. Is the attention economy the way that?
Oh yeah,
you know,
yeah.
How our attention is being hijacked. You know, this seeking for connection is being replaced digitally and satiated, and replacing maybe something more authentic.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. You know, you always want to be careful not to have too many lists of things, but that would be a good 6th one, or maybe that would be somewhere in the misinformation, polarization, attention issue, because they're all kind of related. You know, this short attention span and getting your eyeballs. But there's an excellent point. Absolutely. You know, and you know, it is. I think you're pointing out a really important kind of sad cycle that, you know, your attention is drawn to all these, let's say, social media displays of how people want to look. You realize you're not feeling life that way. So then you spend more time on it because you want to have some kind of satisfaction. And I often call the internet the infinite. You know, it's this infinite sense of being inadequate and this infinite sense of, you know, missing out. And it is, it's exactly what you're saying. And then that just feeds itself. So, you know, getting down to, you know, these three pillars, you know, focusing your attention so you can let that go, opening awareness to realize that you are actually connected. And Simon is actually asking the question, I think, related to this, you know, how do you measure belonging? I've asked a number of people, actually in England, there's a group that says they have a measure of belonging when it comes to connectedness in the use of psychedelic interventions, that people who have a positive outcome for depression, anxiety, facing death and stuff, it is this feeling of connectedness or belonging. But when I've asked other researchers who use the word belonging, how they measure it, this is what they say. They go, I ask people, do you feel like you belong or you don't? And when they say they do, that's what they measure as they belong. And if they say, I don't feel like I belong, so it's not exactly quantitative, but a number of people have said that's how they measure belonging. When I've gone into schools and you can feel a kind of a generative, positive school atmosphere, when you just say to the kids, what does it feel like to be here? They almost always use the word, I belong here. And when you find a school that's the opposite, they say, I don't really belong. You know, so however you would measure it, the subjective experience of membership where you're accepted for who you are. Let's just use that as simple way of talking about belonging. You know, it's a feeling state. Yeah.
Because ideology can give you a sense of belonging. And
well, that's
Wales
absolutely true. Yeah.
Hasn't, I mean, we're a very benign nationalist country in a sense, you know, and I think we have some memory, ancestral memory of being indigenous, but yet again, you know, there's the outer and the inner, when you sense a belonging attached to ideology.
Yeah.
So how do we distinguish between those two?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing. I think there's some fascinating studies of awe and this idea of expanding the sense of self so that when you are with people or with nature, there's just a feeling, well, of belonging, a feeling of membership, a feeling of connection, a feeling of, you know, I'm where I should be and I'm accepted for being here as a part of this larger whole. And, you know, it's hard to describe, but if you look at those three elements of self, you know, subjective experience, perspective, and agency, in many ways, I think belonging is when you expand your subjective feeling that I'm a part of this larger group, that I have a perspective of the group in addition to the individual in the group, and I act on behalf of the group. Now, as you're pointing out, you know, that can lead to world wars, you know, and that can lead to, you know, so it's not like belonging by itself, you know, is a good thing if it's leading to destruction. So that's why I always come back to integration, is the belonging, cultivating, honoring of differences and promoting linkages or not. So belonging by itself is not the thing. I think what the thing is integration. Can you sit within a differentiated aspect of selfing, if you will, and also embrace a relational aspect of selfing? And when you don't do that, then you can kill all sorts of people who you said didn't belong to your tribe. So yeah, so belonging is
I have millions of questions, but I'm gonna give way to somebody else.
Thank you.
Dan, thanks very much for that, Johan. Have you got time for two more quick questions? One from Claire.
Sure.
Claire, and one from Vishvapani.
Let me make sure I'm not missing something. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, just two quick questions. That yeah.
Quick questions. Claire Quinn, over to you.
Hi, Dan. Thanks so much. It was a wonderful to listen to your wisdom. I've just been I've been working with the medicine wheel and integrating teachings from my native Ireland and other cultures. I'm living in Wales, and I find it really powerful as a tool for integration and shifting like the cosmological view. And I just, with your pillar of open awareness that you were talking about, it seemed to really resonate with these ideas. And I wondered, had you been inspired at all in your work by any of those teachings, those wheel teachings?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with them, but I'm really interested in learning more. There's a term that we use from a scientist named Wilson, E.O. Wilson, called consilience. So consilience is where you would find independent approaches that have a common ground that they came to independently. So we're very consiliently oriented. So whether it's the medicine wheel that you're familiar with that I'm not familiar with, or looking at different indigenous teachings, or we haven't gotten into it, but I talk about it a lot in the book Aware. There's a whole view from the study of mathematics, of systems, and physics, of different realms of reality that physics has established. And in the book Aware, you'll see that. And once you start, looking at the consilience of physics with the consilience of indigenous teachings, like the ones you're talking about, or John used to tell me about Irish mysticism, and or even its overlap with Catholicism. It's amazing how putting it all together, you can see a bridge between spirituality and science. So we would be open to learning about anything, but in my own personal journey, that has not been a part of what I was aware of.
Fab, I'll definitely check your book out. That sounds really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And please do come join us. We'll have a sort of a community we're building around these issues, and we'll dive deeply into the physics aspect of consciousness and what that means in terms of open awareness. So I think you might find that really fun.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vish, quick question from you. Vishwapani?
Yes. Thank you so much, Dan.
You're welcome.
So I'm part of the Mindfulness Wales group, and as a mindfulness teacher involved with the mindfulness movement, we know how to engage people individually, although we find we only get a certain kind of person engaging on the whole. We know how to mount interventions in schools and through the health service and so on. And I think what's really coming to our agenda, well, one thing is expanding the reach of all of those things, but also there's a question of changing systems. And so I don't know how to formulate this as a simple question, but that seems to be an important element, that the intervention needs to be held within an organization that's also changing, a school, and even an education system. So that's our agenda. That's what seems important. I'm just interested what your response is, what your thoughts are.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that question. I wrote a book called Mind, where I kind of talk about being a young student and in medical school being so distressed that something was missing. Like my teachers would treat their patients like they were just bags of chemicals. And the culture of medicine, where I was in school anyway, I was a research institution, was so unempathic, so uncompassionate that I dropped out of school. And in the course of dropping out of school, when I decided I would go back, I didn't think the teachers would have changed. So I needed something to protect me from their arrogant, I'll just say it that way, view of a reductionist sense that life was just a bunch of molecules. There was no mind involved, no subjective experience, perspective, agency going on. And Anyway, so I made up this word mindsight for just seeing that there is not just eyesight where you could see like an X-ray or see molecules on an array or something, but you could actually see the mind. And what was really interesting about just having a word as a student was that I could see that the culture, in this case of medicine, was mind-sightless. And so these were super bright, super accomplished, renowned researchers who were clueless when it came to, people having meaning in their lives or emotions or, ways in which to understand the impact of an illness on a family system, for example. Anyway, so over the years, the word mindsight has been quite useful to do just what you're saying, so that you can have a culture that's mindsightless, like when I went to medical school, and part of why I wrote that book was just to document, how you can have a very accomplished, this was Harvard Medical School, right? Have a very accomplished institution that literally had lost its mind. So you can say we, in some ways, have a culture, a larger modern culture that's mind-sightless too. So then you say, okay, well then, what do we do from the ground up in Wales? So you can say, think about it this way. If someone thought that the purpose of life was to sit on a couch and watch TV, over time, that person's body would become, like jelly, right? So you would say to that person, hey, get up and move, kind of like me. I don't know if you know this, but I'm on a walking desk. So, you say, oh, get up and move. Why would I get up and move? I'm just watching TV. There's the reality on the screen. So we can have mindfulness have the same grounding in honoring that you need to exercise the muscle of the mind to strengthen attention, to open awareness, to build kindness into intention, those three pillars, right? So it isn't like something where someone says, oh, this is a Buddhist practice, or this is a spiritual practice, or this is just religion, this meditation stuff is ridiculous. No, it's actually a way of strengthening the integrative circuits of the brain to create 5 physiological changes of well-being that ought to be taught early on in childhood, so that just like you want a person to keep active, no one gets upset when you say move around, so this is like moving around the mind. And I would try to make it as simple as that.
So there's a message. Actually, you've got a mind, and that's fundamental to everything you do.
Absolutely.
We need simple ways to understand that and work with it.
Attention, right?
Yeah.
You build your attention, awareness, intention, and just don't make it fancy. I mean, it doesn't have to be like, oh, we're secretly trying to make people meditators or secretly there's nothing secret about it. It's like the cat is out of the bag. The science is really clear. You want to integrate your brain, which is the base of well-being, then do these 3 pillar practices. You want to create the molecules of health in the body, do these 3 pillar practices. You want to build resilience, do these 3 pillar practices. I mean, so I think, I think the word mindful is fine, but some people, think it's Buddhist. And so at least here in the United States, that becomes a real problem, because we're not allowed to have religion, and Buddhism is considered a religion in schools. So you Google mindfulness and you get Buddhist practice, but 3 pillar practice, which some people call mindfulness, is a brain training practice that expands the sense of self and creates health. So I'm fine if you use mindfulness, if that's not a problem for you, but we just want to get the, we want to take it away from it being weird. Like you wouldn't say, hey, get your kid to walk around, the neighborhood. Get your kid to go out, be near the trees. Someone goes, okay. It's the same thing. You have a mind. Let's strengthen your mind. Just use the word strengthen. Let's strengthen the mind. That's what mindsight does. I mean, I was asked to teach, I can go on and on with this, but the veterinarians of America, they have the highest suicide rate. 3,000 veterinarians were there. You know, they had me do a workshop. So 700 people came to the workshop. 2 of the veterinarians came up and said they were going to kill themselves in front of their colleagues. They said that, right? Now, when you go through what the veterinarians get in their training, zero mindsight, just like in human medicine. Mm-hmm. So, you know, mindsight teaches you to be cultivating the mind towards well-being and connection, period. So it should just be that strong. If you want to use mindfulness, great, the word, but let's be really clear about what do you mean by that. So people don't just say, oh, it sounds kind of gooey, because there's nothing gooey about it. You know, even though you can't weigh it, it has a lot of weight to it. You know what I mean? So, and that's why together, whatever words we use, I mean, you know, we don't want to make the word that we use get people confused.
Right. I'm going to have to cut you off there, Vish. Dan, can I say thank you very much? And I'm going to ask members that are here tonight if they feel comfortable to switch their camera on, and we're going to give Dan a good old Welsh clap and a thank you and a diolch yn fawr iawn, a thank you very much for giving your time free and going over by an extra 11 minutes. Thank you very much, George.
Thank you. Be well, everyone. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Diolch. Thank you.
Okay, and if we can switch everybody back to mute so that we don't get the feedback loop. Now that kind of, as John Lennon said, threw a Spaniard into the works, a spanner into the works, because Dan was supposed to finish at 7:45. So we had our rest of the evening planned around that, but I thought I'd let him continue his talk, and he's done that. He's given us an extra 20 to 25 minutes. So we're going to have, our intention was to have a breakout session. I think we'll go with that. It's been foreshortened dramatically, but we'll have a breakout session. We'll have a quick comfort break while Karen puts us into those groups, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss what relevance that Dan's talk tonight has had for us as mindfulness practitioners and teachers working in many fields, health and education, prisons, or wherever, the workplace. What can we learn from what Dan has said, and how can we take it forward through Mindfulness Wales into policy if possible? So have your comfort break, come straight back, by which time you will be in a breakout group, if Karen can manage to do that. Thank you very much.
I'm just setting up the breakout rooms, but it's not possible for me to be sure whether people are here or not when people are muted with their videos off. So I'm going to set up the breakout rooms just for 5 minutes for everyone to share what are the key insights or the key ideas that you've heard this evening. Will you be taking away with you? Share those with one another in your small group. And in particular, how can you see those ideas, those insights applying to mindfulness in Wales? So 2 things, the key ideas or insights for you and how you see those applying in mindfulness in Wales. And I think we'll just have a very short discussion in the groups, 5 minutes, and then we'll call you back with any reflections that you want to share with everybody in the chat. So you...
Thanks for that, Karen.
Sorry?
Thank you for that.
Okay. So I'm just opening the rooms now.
Right.
And you press, you'll see a little window pop up and you press the button to join the room. And that's optional. You can stay in the main space if you prefer.
Hello. Is there anybody there?
Hello, yes, I'm Dawn.
Yes.
You can't, yeah, you can't see me. Sorry, my video doesn't work. It didn't work last week either.
Are you doing
Right.
a seance, Chris? Are you doing a seance?
I'm doing a seance, and we're trying to keep spirituality out of this, aren't we? Keeping
I'll knock the table. I'll knock the table.
Is there anybody there? Nice. So we've drawn into a close there. We've got 5 minutes left. There were only 3 in the group that I was in, but the suggestion there was what Dan says about community. We do need to concentrate on, and I think Zoom can help us. We're a big nation with a small population, and we have these mindfulness communities across Wales. In Parliament, it's helped us to keep together over the past 18 months. So I think the only point that we discussed is the importance of community in Wales and how can mindfulness help to develop that. And I think some of that can be done on the school gate as well, with the teachers, the pupils, and the parents, and the governors. So that's just a 3-penny worth from our group. Is there anybody want to report back on the other groups? Just a minute on each.
Not an option, Chris, is that people just put things in the chat, and then we can capture them in some way.
Yeah, in fact, I think
we won't have time to hear from everyone.
Yeah, that's the better option, because we have only got 4 minutes left. So if you want to spend that time over in fact, you've got some announcements to do as well. Yeah. You're prepared to forego your announcements?
Look, what we can do, we'll send an email following this session with all of the things we would like to announce. And I think that's probably better than trying to go through a list of things now. But I mean, I will just highlight, if you would like to make a donation to help us continue this work, that will be greatly received. And but how you do that, how you join our mailing list, and how you can consider becoming a trustee and working with us, all that will be in the email.
Well done. Okay, so I think, if you can just spend the final closing minutes now, any thoughts you have on how we can take Dan's inspirational talk through to policy, please do so. And so I think we'll 2 minutes left. I think we'll finish on that, and thank you everybody for coming, and a big thanks again. I know he's gone off, but a big thanks to Dan. He's like that. He will say he's going to speak for an hour in Parliament. He ended up speaking for 2 hours, and he was going to do 3/4 of an hour tonight, and he ended up speaking for 1¼ hours. He's a big, generous man who gives his time and his insights freely around the world, in parliaments, in communities, and it was really great to have him here tonight. And I'll write a nice email on behalf of us all, thanking him for his great gift to us here in Wales. So thank you everybody for coming, and I look forward to seeing you over the next few months with our 3 speakers, Rob, Kathleen Jones and Gwenan, and hopefully Ruby Wax, if we can nail her down. Not nail a date down, sorry. Okay, so thanks everybody for coming. Bye.
Okay, thank you.